اوكي سلام كبرات تخاتتلتي تلفزيون اريسات كميك انيهم انا ركابل هنوك بحال لما عندها مس غازيت انيا هنوك تاخدا كوينا نزنا لهم مدب عدالنا لكم مالنا نالهم غاشانها تتابقيت سباو مسالات فينيسا تسحايه يا كساب مودعتها مسانا حابيركم كتنحوها بخبري يعدمكم سلام فينيسا انكو عدحان متاخر ناب تلفزيون اريسات.
Thank you very much.
Good. Quite a Vanessa. Today's interview is going to be in English, and then hopefully next time we'll do in Tigrinya. Before we start our today's interview, I'm going to do a transitional music, and then after that we're going to come back and then we'll do the interview. Okay, so let's play this music and we'll be back.
لو بزمنا ممزنني حدا جigna ፖለቲከኛ ዝባሃል ወይ መራሒ ጅግናኒ ሃገሪ ዝባሃል ብስለት አእምሮ ዘለዎ ብስለት ፖለቲካ ዘለዎ ሰላም ዝነበረ ናፈታው ዝይር ፈተውቱ ዘብዝሕ ሩሑቅ ዘለዎ ዘቅርብ በረኻ ኮይኖም ብረት ዘዋጣውጡ ዘለዎ ንዑ ዓዲ ሰው ሰላም ሳይተዋዳዳሩ ዝብል ዝጎረን ተሊውን ዝእስስ ዝተበደለን ተሊውን ዝቕሕት
تياركنا تركنا جغانو سبقالسي مقالح دمصيخوم زتسانو مرسي عاتم نايتم المقالح نايلو معبوسان زخاب زيكون تعسناتكم الموسان بروحو يكلمو وانا كورسان أركان أطي عدي سبتاري مساقيا على بحراتكم سابتازري أركانا تياركانا تركانا جغانو سبقالسي نعاهم زي تذكر نعاهم زي تقالس ترفن نفسي أنتم يا تاتين حاجر الهسب كول تلكمنا هندبت الوزبت دمتقوم طاموس من وحشان ناي مبارك دهون تحششي دهون تحششي أنتم معتب هاجر هزبا ويا منكم ودايكم دخونا ذكر بابايتم زي العنباي ومن مكراي غيا معي نبرا لا لا يا حرم لبس هيطلع سلام قبل تقطع الحرات يتربطك مرير وحب لا يفرضي سلام سلام تقطع الحرات أنا زيادة يغلقوا بيبوزو حلوون كما يفلاس دمو كتامو قوين شتاما أركانا أدل يرازر زمر يتكاب سمنا غربر فناريهم
Okay, thank you. Welcome back.
Hello. Okay, so I guess we're going to get started with the questions now. So, okay. So, in the last 10 years, you've been at the forefront of Eritrean human rights advocacy. And I heard that this started off when you were 15 years old as a high school student. And I'm sure by now that a lot of people know who you are, who Vanessa is. But there's not much about, you personally, like as your personal life, your work, your studies. And today we want to change that. So without further ado, could you please introduce Vanessa, the person who's behind all this advocacy and hard work, and just tell us a little bit about your personal life and your studies and your work, etc.
Of course. And thank you so much for having me on and for being my host, both of you, Jorkevel and Henok. So to start off, I guess what most people who know me know, I was born and raised in Sweden, in Stockholm, in 1996. Both my parents are from Eritrea and they came to Sweden in the late 80s, early 90s. And I guess a lot of my life has been public because of my work. So parts of it is, most people know about my uncle's story and how I started One Day See Him, why I started One Day See Him. And a lot of that is obviously interlinked with other parts of my life. So like what I studied, where I've lived. So I could talk about that a little bit together. But as we also know, the Eritrean human rights space can be a very vicious space for people who have, different opinions than we have sometimes. And it's just better sometimes to not be too public about certain aspects of your life. I am quite public. Like if you follow me on social media, I don't hide that much, but it was also like a decision not to be too open. And we'll probably get into that later, but just to kind of start off with that. But yeah, I was born and raised in Sweden. I always wanted to work from as like, early teenage years, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to work in like criminal law or like in some kind of, work that working with people, but in Sweden. So I wanted to be a lawyer in Sweden. And that was always my dream. And I've always been passionate about Eritrea since I was young. It was because of my mom. My mom would tell me stories about our country, my family. I visited twice as a child. A lot of people say on social media that I've never been to Eritrea, and I try not to engage too much with certain people's engagements because they're usually very just harmful and hateful. But that's actually something that is not true. I've been to Eritrea twice, and those two visits formed a large part of how I view the country and how I view my responsibility towards it as well. Like my relationship of going there as a teenager and going there when I was younger as a child, and like how I was perceived and how I was in relation to what was happening there. So that was very like formative for me, those two visits. And then my mom's storytelling growing up. And so when I started in my final year of like when I was 15, I had already been a part of this Amnesty group at my school for quite a long time. And what we did there was what most people who know about Amnesty would know, is that people who are members in different capacities, either in school, in high school, universities, outside of those like educational spaces, you get these campaigns sent to you. So we would get a campaign, for example, that said, this is happening in Kenya, and you can sign petitions and you can gather petitions. And then we would do that one day, and then that would be sent back, and then that would make a difference because those signatures would be used for something larger. And for me, that was my introduction to activism. And once I found out what that was and that was a thing, I was like, I want to do this for my country. Like, I want to do this for Eritrea, because I was spending all those years, I'd say at least 3 years in school, from like 12 to 15, doing that. And that was something that, I really, really cared about, but I cared more, of course, about my own country and my uncle. So for me, that was my transition from like wanting to be a lawyer and wanting to work for people, but then understanding that I wanted to work specifically for my people. And so, I've always been very passionate about justice, about the law, about human rights, and then kind of going from like the broader like interest to realizing I could actually do something for my country. And so I was 16 when I started One Day CM, not 15, and it was in high school, and I decided to just model it after what I'd learned with how Amnesty did campaigning on like low level, like schools, high schools, and started the group in Sweden, and we mobilized students mostly in the country, and then slowly but surely started growing outside of the country as well. So I did that in high school. Then I studied law in London for 3 years, and I also worked as a journalist. Maybe you want to ask follow-up questions now.
Okay, that is really interesting. Just a full disclaimer, for the people that didn't know, Yorkabel is my daughter. She's my oldest daughter, and she's going to be 17 now. And the reason that we are doing together this one is because Vanessa inspired us. She's been at the forefront, and she has been advocating for not only for her uncle CM, but for every Eritrean, for every injustice in Eritrea. So we want to be together with my daughter because she's been a real model for a lot of young Eritreans, not only for Eritreans, but also for all of us, not only for teenagers or young people. So today, being doing this one with my daughter, I'm hoping that other young people will also get involved into the injustice and then all the stuff happening in Eritrea, because at the end of the day, Eritrea belongs to the young people like Yorkabel, Vanessa, and others. So this is what we are trying to showcase today, and hopefully others will follow through. And I'm sure that Vanessa has been an inspiration to many young people. So having said that, I'm going to go to my question. As you've been said that you start at the age of 16 when you were high school. And obviously, parents are always protective of their kids. I'm sure, if Yorkabel would have to ask me, I'm going to do this and that, you always want, to protect your child. So it's not easy, being also as an immigrant parent. So how was your parents? Are they supportive of you? And then also, how does activism affect you? Once you started, how does it affect your life?
That's a good question. Well, my mom is my most supportive person in my life. I have very supportive networks, regardless of my friends, my family, but my mom is the most supportive parent. She's not just supportive of we always share the same politics, but she's always been very supportive of me doing activism. She's very concerned, of course, and from the beginning she was definitely concerned. And obviously with times it's been much more it's gone up and down with treatment from other people, harassment, abuse, stuff like that. So as any parent, she gets concerned and worried. But as a whole, she's very supportive, very proud. And also it's just like my soundboard. We discuss issues all the time, ideas for campaign, ideas on situations, and all of that. And I think even the fact that I started with an organization, I think at that age was less about also having the ability to do so, but also kind of believing I could do so, which is quite I'm not saying it was difficult to do, but the idea of starting something that big and then not being scared of what that would mean and pushing it and believing I could do anything, that came from my mom as well, because she's always just been very you can do anything you want, basically. Never made me hesitate. And I've tried so many different things because I've had that confidence from my mom. So yeah, that's very crucial to my work.
How does that affect your life, the activism?
I think it's gone up and down depending on the situation, depending on the time. I think at the core of who I am is this burning desire for justice for my people. Like I can't separate it from who I am. So I've never wanted to been like, okay, I'm going to do it for a few years and then I'm not going to go back. I've definitely had taken breaks. Like there are times when I was at university and I had exams every day for 2 months. And I knew that if I prioritize my activism, it wouldn't make a difference to the activism, because we know that the situation is like very dire and it's a very long-term game. But if I take time from my work and my studies, it's going to affect my studies. So I have to make those decisions all the time of like what's more crucial in this moment, both for me, because I have to survive as well as a human being, but also for the movement as a whole. So I'd say it's a balancing act. But it's definitely like, I mean, it's one of those things where people will say, but well, you chose to be an activist, which meant you chose to be a public figure, which meant that you chose to kind of all the things that came with it. But I'm just a concerned citizen. Like I'm a concerned Eritrean. I'm not an actress or a politician. I'm not. And I think sometimes people put on very unfair expectations on what activists, especially public activists, should be able to handle. So there are aspects of this that I think are like unfair, like the way people treat me. Even there have been like comments and abuse from people who I know, people who are like related to my family members or not my family members, and the response there has been very much like, but she's an activist, she chooses this. So there are always going to be disagreements between like family, but that's very unfair to put on me, I think. So there's like situations like that I think are unfair, but apart from that, I've been able to keep a good balance, I'd say, between my work, my life, my studies, my activism, all of that, because it's something I really care about, and I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't keep the balance.
That would be interesting, yes.
Yeah, it seems that you go through a lot of struggle, but the support system you have is amazing. So that's why you were able to start. So going on to the next question, the main reason you even started activism was because of your uncle, right? Tsehaye. And for those who don't know, Tsehaye, he was unjustly detained with 10 other Eritrean journalists in 2001. So what can you tell us about Tsiom and his character, his work ethics, and his family?
Of course. Tsiom Tsehaye is a journalist, a photographer, and who was a very vocal critic at the time, and of course remains a critic, but behind bars now. Most Eritreans know him as the Tigara Laisa, which means the war photographer in Tigrinya. He was a very famous war photographer for the EPLF during the war, who documented key moments in Eritrean history. He documented several battles, but also the march from Asab to Asmara when Eritrea gained independence. And that's a very monumental scene that a lot of the pictures that captures, the core of what the Eritreanness and our victory and all of that is. So because of those images and because of who he was during the struggle, he was already quite known outside of his work as a vocal critic that started, I would say, after. But even the fact that the public work to criticize the government started afterwards, Tsiom had always been a critical person. He'd always hold people in power to account. He was even imprisoned for a whole year, which a lot of people don't actually know, during the War of Independence by the EPLF. He was imprisoned for voicing his opinions about the leadership, about certain decisions that were being made, about the lack of openness. Which wasn't that, it wasn't like a strategic thing that he went up and had a protest. He was just talking a lot about democracy. He was talking a lot about these principles that should have been at the core of our movement, but he felt, and many others felt at the time, weren't. And so because of that, he was imprisoned. Of course, we don't know exactly what led to his imprisonment during the war, but it was because of the fact that he was a very open, very critical person. And so that continued after independence. And as the government started becoming more and more restrictive, as it was becoming more clear that the elections weren't going to happen and that the government was moving towards authoritarianism and dictatorship as opposed to democracy, which was the deal between the people and the people in power at the time was, we fight for independence and then we get a country where we can live a safe, dignified life with democracy, human rights, equality. And so he was noticing that this wasn't happening. So he became a part of this group of people that were voicing their concerns, politicians, journalists, and they were eventually imprisoned, most of them in September 2001, following the shutdown of the free press. And none of them have been released. We don't know what any of those people are, and we can only pray that they're still alive.
Yeah, that's very sad history, since 2001. We know that, so many Eritreans have been suffering for decades because of the barbaric action of the Eritrean regime. Many parents, sons, daughters, wives, and husbands didn't know the whereabouts of their beloved family members once kidnapped by the regime for decades. Your family is one of the victims of this brutal regime. And it is really hard to understand what those families are going through for decades, unless you are in their shoes. I'm sure, we can sympathize, but it is really, really hard to know exactly what the feeling is. So can you share with us the agony of your family, especially your grandmother and then Sium's kids, for not knowing anything about Sium for the last 2 decades?
Of course, I think when it comes to political prisoners, people either see like just the political side or the people side. Like people will only speak about, oh, it's so sad that these families haven't seen these political prisoners, but then they'll forget the implications, like why they were released. Like it's not about one or two individuals, it's about something larger. Or the other way around, people will only talk about political prisoners to make a point about the political situation and ignore this human suffering behind that horrific political crime that has been committed. So in our case, like for One Day Sium, it was always very clear that One Day Sium was about continuing my uncle's mission, fighting for his release, making sure his name wasn't forgotten, and more, as I said from the beginning, to continue his mission. And that's why our work has always involved refugee rights. It has always involved other human rights issues happening in Eritrea. It's always involved other people outside of my uncle. And there's a misconception sometimes that we only focus on my uncle. Which I'd say is probably mostly from people who don't actually follow our work, because anyone who's followed our campaigns can see that we've focused on almost any issue that the Eritrean people have encountered in one way or another, whether it's like through a statement, through a massive campaign, through a highlight, through an interview, whatever it is. We have continued, we hope, Sium's mission. But at the core of it, of course, again, is the human suffering behind the case. And that's also what inspired me, of course, to get involved in the first place. I think my cousins grew up in Eritrea and they came to Europe, to France later in their lives. And I met them in Eritrea the first times. And I think there was something about knowing that their dad was imprisoned for reasons within our control. Like there are so many other reasons why people don't grow up with their parent, like sickness, or sometimes people have bad characters and they leave, or like there's so many other reasons why people could miss out on such an amazing, privilege of having two parents. And knowing that their dad was taken away from them for such a stupid reason, like it had nothing to do with anything beyond our control, was just heartbreaking for me. And I think it doesn't even compare. I can never even like explain how much they have suffered, how much his wife has suffered, how much his siblings, and especially, of course, his mom. His mom's suffering was very public. She was very open about her sadness, about her suffering. And so anyone who knows my grandmother, like, even not even to talk too much, because I could talk about her for a very long time. She was a very brilliant, brave person. She's always had been. She was in the war. She was involved. After the war, she was very quickly saying that something is going wrong with this government, and she was being very open about that as well. And then when one of her sons was martyred in the war, she said that, like, she was like, I'm not going to cry for my son. He was brave. He gave up the most beautiful thing you can do for your country, which is your life. And she's like, I'm not going to cry for my, incredible son. And then when Sium was imprisoned, and this was around 10 years after she had heard about her other son being being killed in the war, she was completely like destroyed. And it's interesting to look at these two sons' deaths and why these two sons' like disappearances or like from her life. One of them, her not grieving, the other one, her destroying her. And that was because in the first place, it was because that was for the country, that was needed for independence to come. Bloodshed had to happen. Whereas in my other uncle's case, in Sium's case, it wasn't needed. This was completely unnecessary. And it wasn't just that her son was taken away from her. It was the fact that he was taken from her by the people she had fought with and trusted. And that kind of betrayal must completely, I can't even imagine how much the devastation that causes a person, especially someone who's given up so much to fight with these people, like gave up all those years to fight in the war, all the children that she kind of sent to the war to fight as well, all of the sacrifices she had to make, only for those people that she gave all the sacrifices for, that she thought she was going to gain from, to completely betray her. So she was destroyed for the last 20 years of her life. She passed away last year. She was in a kind of indefinite mourning period where she was always waiting for information. She always had a radio on in her house. She was always like calling out officials, not just about her son, but about the conditions in the country. She was brave. She was brilliant. As I said, she was all of this throughout her entire life. Everyone called her Jigna. Like that was the only way they described her. I remember when she passed, everyone was crying so much. And it wasn't because of age. She had lived a long life. It was the fact that she died heartbroken. And everyone knew it. And the fact that someone like that who'd given up so much was betrayed by the people she had trusted, only to end up in her last minutes heartbroken is, yeah. And I think that speaks to the heartbreak many other mothers face. She was one of the last mothers of the G15 and the journalist to pass, actually. And I remember we were trying to figure out who was still alive and who would be still alive when they are released in the future. Because now it's been over 22 years, and many of these mothers are getting old. And so, yeah, that's just a snippet of the suffering families are suffering right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really, really sad story. I know that, a lot of Eritreans are suffering. We know that not only just journalists and then political leaders, but, the country is a massive prison, A lot of people disappear and nobody knows where, where they get detained and everything. So this is our story, this is, Eritrean story, and it's very, very sad. One thing that I would like to ask is, if you ever met, Siyum, what was your memory? What was something that always come to your mind? Maybe you met them like in person or on the phone, whatever, but is there something that, it's always that you remember about Siyum, that if you can share something?
No, I've actually never met Siyum. I went to Eritrea 2 years after he was imprisoned, and we couldn't go because I was born in '96, and then when the war started, or when things were getting a bit, obviously we couldn't go then. And then we couldn't go because some family stuff was happening in Sweden. So I didn't go until 2003, unfortunately. So I've never met him in person. But of course, I've heard so much. I mean, I grew up hearing about him. I grew up hearing about him from people who knew him, like my mom, everyone around me. And then as I've continued my work in the past, 10 years, I've continued to hear story after story. And it's one of the most consistent kind of character building I've seen from outside of a person themselves, like someone who's not here with us, but the same kind of stories, the same kind of characters being brought up, for me has been very confirming to feel like, okay, I feel like at this point, I'm very close to who he was before he was imprisoned, because of all these people who keeps retelling me the same kind of stories.
What is the story that as you say, been obviously, Siyum, as your uncle been, especially after his kidnapping, you may hear a lot of things about him. What is the story that really resonates with you? That's something that makes you, I should have met him, or, he shouldn't be in that prison. Is there something that, really touches you that, you can share with us?
Yeah, of course. I think from he's my political hero. I think what I respect the most about Siyum, not as his niece, not as his family member, but as an Eritrean, as a human being, is his relentless pursuit for justice. He doesn't care. He genuinely doesn't seem to care about the consequences, as long as what he's doing will benefit a larger group of people. It doesn't even have to be himself. It could be in a different lifetime. And I think hearing stories about that and seeing how he's not willing to compromise for the larger potential picture, and seeing, for example, when the disabled veterans were protesting in Eritrea and they were shot down by the government, he was one of the few people who wanted to speak about it, who was speaking about it and was protesting what was happening. And same thing happened when the students were protesting at the Asmara University. He was covering it. He was amplifying their voices, calling for for support for them. Again, did not care about what that would mean for him. And I think hearing stuff like that, those are just two very big stories, but even hearing smaller stories like that, hearing how he communicated with people in power without any regard of how they would treat him or what would happen to him, that for me is extremely inspirational, and again speaks to who he was. And people really liked him. I think obviously being liked can be subjective. Some people have a harder time appealing to larger groups of people, but I think the fact that so many people who've met him share some similar stories of how good he was with them and how he communicated so nicely, and even people who were fans of him and they met him briefly and the way he treated them in those short moments, just I think speaks to his character. And also someone who I spoke to, a foreign journalist who was in Eritrea just a few months before Siyum was imprisoned, and he interviewed him. And I asked him what stood out for you in his interview with him. And he was saying that I completely understand why the government would imprison someone like him. He was he's charismatic, he's smart, he's kind, people like him, he's fearless, he will not stop by any means. And that's of course why they imprisoned him. And I think that characterization speaks to who he was.
Yeah, go ahead, Yorkaba.
Yeah. So, even though he is imprisoned, it seems like his mission and what he started to do in Eritrea, it's still with us today. It seems that's the reason you started the campaign in the first place into 2013. So, when you started this campaign to fight for him and his colleagues' release, as well as to give the people in Eritrea a voice because of the regime and the dictator there, what can you tell us about the major works that's been done by the campaign? And for those who don't know about the campaign, can you shed a little light on the inner workings and how people can get involved and active?
Of course. So I started One Day Seum as an organization in 2013. So this is actually our 10-year anniversary, which we will be celebrating. So I'm sure hopefully we can do some celebratory event or stream or something. But our anniversary is going to be the summer, fall. And so the organization in the very beginning, like if you look at, we released this video that tells Seum's story and it tells Eritrea's story together. So the idea was that we would use Seum's story as a vehicle to tell the country story. And by fighting for Seum at the time, we were fighting for the country as well, which is, I think, so very valid. Like we're fighting for the people who, if they were free, would lead the country to like liberation is what we think. These people who were in prison in 2001 were in prison because they were seen as a threat. They had the capacity, they had the skills, they had the like people support to kind of do something. So that's what we were saying at the time. And the idea was that we would, again, use these stories to raise awareness about what was happening in Eritrea and to mobilize people to get involved. So we started off with that, and we were campaigning mostly around like the situation in Eritrea as a whole, around political prisoners, and then more and more on refugee issues, and then getting more specific within Eritrean human rights issues as well. And it became, I always wanted to mobilize the diaspora. That was always my plan, my dream, but people didn't want to get involved. In 2013, people were very scared. It was not as publicly acceptable to be anti-government. You didn't have to be pro-government necessarily publicly, but if you're anti, it would mean you could get isolated from your community. You would face a lot of abuse, just like you do now, I guess. But there were less people who would support you or who'd be on your side publicly. And although people would say sometimes like, oh, we would love to support, but we can't do it publicly, there weren't that many. But the few Eritreans that were active, we would obviously get to know each other online. And we would build alliances to work together online. But then we were mobilizing agents. So we mobilized a lot of Eritreans at schools across the world. We did it. I went to an international, so whenever any of my friends or classmates would travel somewhere, I'd give them like flyers and they would mobilize people where they were. And that's kind of how it started. And then we obviously did our campaigns and we did our work online, and we mobilized people. We did media work. We did a lot of TV interviews, a lot of like our own productions, like videos, podcasts, and stuff like that, to raise awareness, to mobilize. And it wasn't until the peace deal in 2018 that we started mobilizing more and more. So at the core of what we do is mobilize Eritreans and allies, non-Eritreans, to raise awareness about what happens in Eritrea, to campaign on issues, both to continue raising awareness and to provide solidarity, but also to campaign on issues where we think we can make a difference. So if there's an issue where we think, okay, there's something where we can push here, we try to mobilize around those issues specifically. And then what we also do is provide refugee support services to Eritrean refugees in different places. So people can call in on our website, on our Facebook page, and we'll pair them with a volunteer, and that volunteer will help them navigate whatever issue they're facing at the moment, both if it's like an emergency issue, if they're like in some place where they need help, or if they're people looking to, develop their skills and start studying or find a new job, or whatever it is professionally that they need support with. So I'd say those are the three like pillars, or like 4 pillars: mobilization in terms of like getting activists, mostly young Eritreans involved. We have members meetings, we mobilize people, we have like group chats, we kind of keep that social side. And then what we do with those people is campaign, raise awareness, provide support services and stuff. So yeah, I would say that's the summary of what we do.
Okay, that's good. Do you have anything follow up? If not, I will keep going to the next question. The One Day Seum, I heard that. I just want to know if that's true. All the volunteers are girls. Is that right?
No, that's actually not true. But okay. I'd say a big majority of our membership are women.
Okay, that's. So I was really wondering that, like if that's the case, then why would it be, but okay. So I mean,
okay. Why not? No, I'm kidding. I
No,
think,
of course, why not? But I was wondering that our men are not involved. Now what is going on? But now you just it's a good news. I'm glad
no,
that
let me explain. Actually, I can
Okay.
explain.
All right.
So I mean, also something I forgot to say before what we do, because we do production work. So we did, as I said, we have we do like videos, we have podcast episodes from the past, but we're starting a new podcast now. And then we also have a magazine that we started 2 years ago that was called 2001 Magazine, that is aimed to kind of continue the work of the journalist from 2001, of course, after the Free Press was shut down. So that was one of my favorite projects that we've done. And so it's on our website. If anyone's interested, I can send the link as well. But yeah, just that being said, One Day Team has always had a majority, I'd say, of young women. I think partly it's because, one of the reasons I think it's really important to have like diversity in like high leadership is because it inspires other people who want to get involved. Like if you're an opposition group and you're only middle-aged men, you're more likely to attract only other middle-aged men, because that's the people who like you know their language, they see you, they think, oh, like someone who's like my peer. And I think similarly for me, the fact that I was the same demographic as most, as these other people, these young Eritrean women, they saw me and they're like, oh, this is someone who's like me, who speaks my language, who I would want to be in like community with. And same way when we have other like, young Eritrean women also taking up space on our social media pages and other things like that, that shows that we're many of us. And if you're like us, you can join, which is not to say other people can't join, but I think that's how like those group like creations usually like start. And I think that also helps explain why a lot of opposition groups look the way that they do. It's not very inviting for someone who doesn't belong to that group or who doesn't feel invited by that group, whether that's through language or this behavior, or even like similar interests. Like our meetings are a bit more, the same way our meetings would be if I was hanging out with my friends, but with an agenda. So that also is a bit more inviting to other people. But we have many great male members as well. But in our executive team, we're just women.
Okay, the executive teams are women. Okay,
that's not a conscious decision. It just happened to be that the people who were best equipped and who wanted to give that, do that, were women. Although I would encourage people, actively putting women on their executive teams and boards if that's not already natural. But in our case, it was natural because we were naturally in a very, space that was inviting to people of different, like not just men basically taking up all the space. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good thing, but while we are on this topic, we know that women are the backbone of our struggle, not, even like the armed struggle. Without women's participation, probably you don't know how long would it take, for, that armed struggle to, for the independence. So how do you see women participation on everything that we do, do you see a lot of women in a different, like even within the opposition, within the activism, do you see a lot of women, what do you expect, how do you see it?
I mean, I grew up, like my first political, outside of my uncle, I always say the person who made me an activist was my uncle, but the person who like showed me what activism in the Eritrean space was Vanessa Tsehaye. Like she, for me, was the epitome of a citizen who's doing her duty in whatever capacity that she could for as long as she could. She, for me, has always been like my political hero. And she always calls herself like my activist mom. People think she's my real mom, but she's my activist mom, which means that she's, fostered me within the Eritrean like activism space. And I grew up with a lot of, in the space, because I was still, I guess, growing up as a teenager. There were other older Eritrean women who were taking up space, who were brilliant, who were hardworking. And I think their work spoke for itself. The fact that they could work individually or even in community with others, but they stood out. I mean, everyone knows who these women are. Like anyone, if I speak about Vanessa Tsehaye, all of these like women, people know who they are, but that doesn't mean that they have been treated in the way that they should have been, that they've been scrutinized equally to other people in the movement who are men. It doesn't mean that within the largest Eritrean groups that people like them have been able to take up the space that they deserve, or that within other groups, that means that they have like also had women in those positions. It just happens to be that we have women who are brilliant, but I think that doesn't reflect how our space looks in general. And I think that's a confusion sometimes people have, that just because we have women who are great, our Eritrean human rights opposition space is open and like conducive to women as well. But if you look at our largest like opposition groups, even platforms, YouTubers, all of that. Like a lot of times panel discussions will be just men, or if you look at events, it will be just men or predominantly men. Even if you go to like certain like opposition events, you'll see most men being on the stage or having the key roles, and you'll see most of the women, even the women who are part of the organizing group, people who are equally like, you know, a part of that political mission, are in the kitchen or serving the food, or even like, you know, doing some other roles that are more traditionally like for women. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, like structurally within our movement. But of course, there are brilliant women doing incredible work. And I think also an important thing is that I haven't done any research on this, but from what I've seen in my many years of doing this, women are disproportionately affected by abuse and harassment in our community from people outside, people, you know, in the Eritrean community as a whole, not within the opposition. So I think that also puts a certain expectation on the women who, if you're going to become active, be ready for your appearances to be attacked, for your life choices to be attacked, for your like pictures to be changed, you look very different or ugly or whatever you want to call it. Like there is a personal price that I think is higher for women than there are for men to get if you're going to get involved in the Eritrean space. And I think that also has the unfortunate consequence of silencing women. But I think actively, the opposition is not doing a great job in like elevating and amplifying women as well.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead, your comment.
Okay, thank you. So you started your fight for activism because of your uncle Sion, but you've grown over the years, and now you're fighting for every injustice that occurs within Eritrea. And in the past several years, you've also been fighting passionately and campaigning for the release of Siham Ali. So what can you tell us about her that resonates with you, and what do you want to tell the people that you found out about her, or something that you learned?
Sure, thank you. So I remember very clearly seeing Siham's case on Twitter around the time it happened, and I was thinking that something seemed strange. I was like, what's happening? There's no way a young American woman could have been imprisoned and nothing happening about it, or no one writing about it. And I think at the time I was definitely naive to how much people outside of Eritrea cared about Eritrea. And I also think a bit naive to how well our movement functioned, because like if that would happen today, I'm hoping at least we're better equipped to deal with something like that, and we would respond as a stronger community. But I think at the time there wasn't a great like mobilization around her case, and that made me wonder what was happening. But very clearly and very quickly, I was like, this is definitely not something complicated. It's someone whose dad left the government, and the government seems to be holding her in, you know, to punish her father. Like it sounds even maybe complicated when I say it, but for anyone who follows Eritrean human rights and the situation in Eritrea, it's not necessarily a unique situation. It is a little bit more different, because usually the family members will be punished, but it's not as public, and we don't know exactly who, and all of that is not as high profile. So this, I think, seeing this and seeing the fact that she was an American citizen, I saw as an avenue for something to be done, because there are countless people imprisoned in Eritrea, and I think it's really important for us to remember that. And I hope that we are able to say that as much as we can in our campaigning, as well, that we know that this is something that affects countless Eritreans. We know that there are children, teenagers, elderly imprisoned in Eritrea. But the reason why I've chosen to specifically focus on Siham's case, in addition to always raising awareness about other cases, to always campaigning for other Eritreans, is because from a campaigning perspective, you have to think, where can my energy be most like valuable? And it's not about choosing something that could get you an easy win in a year or 2 years, but it's about asking yourself, okay, so for the past, 5 years, we've been raising awareness, campaigning on issues affecting Eritreans in Eritrea, and we're not getting any things happening. So as we will continue doing that, which we have continued doing on the side, but let's also look for cases where we can do something. So for example, when it comes to refugees, we're currently working on a campaign for Eritrean refugees in Sudan, because how terrible the Sudanese government might be, it is much more likely that we could maybe have an impact there than, for example, if we would focus on refugees in Libya, where the government is chaos, and there's so many other stakeholders involved that have vested interest in the country. So just thinking strategically, where can we make a difference? And seeing that this is a person who holds citizenship from the most powerful country in the world, where if we did mobilization correctly, could get engaged and could potentially make a difference for her case. So for us, it was a strategic decision because we saw a person who could have had a lifeline. We don't know yet, but it could be a lifeline for her. And it hasn't been activated. No one's trying to pull that lifeline to see, is this going to save her? Whereas for the other cases, we have done everything in our power to pull any lifeline, but they're not, foreign citizens. My uncle's just an Eritrean citizen. So yes, I can appeal to the US government, I can appeal to the EU, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day because he is not one of theirs. He's not one of their citizens. Same thing with other prisoners. So for me, fighting for Siham's case is my responsibility because this is someone who we have been campaigning for, by campaigning for all Eritreans, but then looking at her circumstances and seeing, wow, there's actually a potential lifeline here. We need to do everything we can to try because otherwise we're failing her. And that's why I say it's my responsibility because I'm sitting here and I have the possibility to pull that lifeline. And if I don't try, then that's my failure. So that's why we focus on Siham's case. And for anyone who doesn't know, again, she was the daughter of Ali Abdullah, who was the Minister of Information, who left the Eritrean government, defected, and as we think as punishment for that, they took his daughter, and she's been imprisoned for more than 10 years now. She was in prison at the age of 15 and is now turning actually 26 in a few weeks. So we've been campaigning for her actively for the past years, both through campaigning online, mobilizing in person, lobbying, advocacy, all of these different things to kind of get her case more known and to get the US government to finally intervene in her case.
Okay, Vanessa, as you have been said, she is a U.S. citizen, and on many occasions you have been calling for the U.S. government to secure the release of Siham from Eritrean prison, as they always do with every American citizens held captive all over the world. Why do you think the U.S. government haven't done any tangible work to secure her release? And have you ever met with U.S. officials to discuss about her? If they say anything, what do they say? And at the same time, also, have you ever met her father, Ali Abdullah? I know that he's in Australia. I know your team has been, really working, advocating for her. So have you ever been also met Ali Abdullah?
Sure. Just to kind of talk about her case. So I think it's why they're not getting involved. It could be larger than her case, and it could be about the Eritrean, Eritrea as a country as well. So larger than her case, Siham is, as we all know, a Black young woman. So in America as a country, that's not usually the demographic that's prioritized by the government. And we see that when it comes to women disappearing and where do the resources go, not just from the government, from the media. Had she been disappeared in Ukraine, for example, as an Ukrainian American woman, would she have received the same kind of attention, regardless of the nationality politics, regardless of where they think they can make a difference? I think in terms of just how much do they care, genuinely care, I think that's a very interesting point that we have to always have in the back of our mind, that this is something it's already something that we have to deal with. In addition to her being from a country where there's not a lot of change. So the other thing is also the fact that Eritrea is not a country where the government is open to conversation and is willing to compromise. So how much space has there been for the US government, if they have done something, we don't know everything they've done, so of course, to actually do something, and how much is that deterring them from trying? If they think, okay, it doesn't make a difference what we say, which is obviously not the way that you should do these things. You should always try, but that could also have factored into why they haven't prioritized her. I think in addition to all of those two things, some of her representatives come from areas with large Eritrean and Ethiopian populations. And I also think that there have been hesitations to upset those demographics by speaking out too loudly about Siham. I don't know how much that could be founded. It's just a speculation because we have to speculate at this point because we're not getting any answers. I don't think Eritrea is I know Eritrea is not a priority country, and Eritrea is mostly only relevant to the US and many other entities in relation to Ethiopia. And for that reason, her case would not be priority because it doesn't really relate to the security situation with Ethiopia. So I think it's a priority issue as well. Politically, it's not really important. And I definitely think the lack of pressure on them to do something has helped them get away with not doing anything. There's not if they fail to do something in any other area that there's no public pressure and awareness around, they will be shamed to acting, at least if that's something they can do. And if it's just lack of priority that's keeping them from doing something, if there's not around shame or enough shame, then that could maybe make them want to get more involved. And I think the fact that there's not enough pressure on them. They're not getting shamed or publicly like called upon to do more has definitely helped. So a big part of our mission has been to elevate her story and making sure people actually know that she exists, both within our community, because a lot of Eritreans, especially young Eritrean women, didn't even know who Siham was, that she was imprisoned. I remember our first campaign for her in 2019, 2018, was massive, because instantly people were like, we had no idea. Even many of our own members had no idea who she was. And then each campaign we grew and grew and grew, and it became, now it's like most Eritrean young people, especially young women, know who Siham is, at the very least. And then we collaborated with Amnesty on a big campaign for her as well. And so now we have over 450,000 signatures demanding her release, calling on Secretary Blinken to release her. So now the next step is using those signatures to kind of pressure the administration to get involved. So it's a slow game, because we're trying to build up that awareness, that anger, that pressure that they're hopefully going to feel on social media, on like their email box, on their phone, because we've done a lot of calling campaigns as well. It's something that we want to be profiled enough in the media to be something they're feeling, okay, we keep getting asked about this, what are we doing? And also we have these signatures that will strengthen that pressure. So it's very much about building up that case and pushing as much as we can. I can't really speak about engagements with the US government so far on the case. All I can say is it's very slow. It's definitely not a priority, and it shows, and it's very sad, considering that she's a young person. I mean, she's a human being, and she has family who misses her, and seeing how little that she's prioritized is heartbreaking. And yeah, I can't really speak about, I mean, her family. We communicate with her uncle is a representative for the family, and everything we do is consent from him through the family as well. So that's all.
Okay, that's good. That's fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess moving on. I think in terms of youth involvement with cases like these, there's a lot of like lack, and I think it's people like you that inspire us, to inspire the youth, I guess, now to mobilize and to see representation of people like you in esteemed establishment and organizations. As recently you were as a part of human rights activism, you were invited to address the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, right? So your testimony was very powerful and touching. So why don't we go ahead and watch the video first?
But I know that this tiredness will never defeat us. Too much has been sacrificed for generations. So tired. Most Eritreans are. But I know that this tiredness will never defeat us. Too much has been sacrificed for generations before us. Too much is at stake for current and future generations. I constantly think about my uncle Siham, who after decades of fighting for independence and now even more decades of fighting for democracy, refuses to give up. A former prison guard testified that Siham, despite living under terrible conditions in prison, always kept repeating, "I did my duty, it is my responsibility, I don't care if I die here." May his courage, selflessness, and resilience inspire us all.
So during this meeting, I know there's a lot of strong emotions, but can you tell us how you were feeling having to represent all of us as a country during this meeting, and what the atmosphere was like when you had to confront, face-to-face the regime's delegations?
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that clip. I think I've spoken at the UN once before in 2019, and I remember coming there and feeling very emotional. At that time, I was mostly angry. It was a year after the peace deal. For me, the peace deal was one of the most horrendous experiences as like a diaspora Eritrean, to see how little the Eritrean people's interests were prioritized or even talked about in conversations around this historic moment. As everyone knows, when the peace deal happened, everyone was talking about, oh, it's this amazing, there's peace now between the two countries. This means that things, either no one mentioned the situation in Eritrea, or people use it, people and institutions use it as an fake positive news, saying, oh, this means that things are going to change in the country. So I was really angry about that. I am still very angry about that. But at the time, I was very, very angry. So when I came, I felt those emotions elevated, because I was in a space where these states and these institutions were represented. Like all of these people institutions I'd been very angry with were all there, including the Ethiopian government, including the Eritrean government, but also the UN, the EU, all these members, states that had been supporting of the Eritrean government, and even worse, the democratic states that pretends to care about democracy and human rights, but in other countries just care about their own interests. So I remember being very angry, and I think this time, 4 years later, I was very, very sad. I've been feeling, and I think as most Eritreans have been feeling, very tired. And so the theme of my speech was tiredness within our community and how tired we are of these things that are just so big. Like even on their own, they're very big, but all together, it's just too much. And I think my grandmother's death last year and time ticking, and now this being my 10th year as an activist, has really put some things into perspective of how betrayed we've actually been. And I traveled a lot for work, and I was in 3 African countries last year. And all those 3 times, I was just devastated. Like anyone who's with me for any of those trips know I just always was talking about, like, I can't believe we don't even have anything close to this in our country. And the fact that I'm not asking for Eritrea to be the most developed or like rich country in the world, but just the fact that we don't have anything on the levels that any countries like have, most of the countries in the world have, who are not at war, or like North Korea, I guess. But Eritrea just doesn't really compare to any other country. And I think knowing that and seeing that and having more and more upset about that in the past year, and then coming there again to speak and feeling just like, this is, it's gone too far. And it's always gone too far from the day one. But now it's been like, it just feels people feeling very tired. So I was feeling that. And as soon as I saw the delegation, and as soon as I felt, I was giving my speech, I got, as you could see, a bit emotional at the end, which is very unusual for me. I don't think I've never really cried in public or anything like that, but I was very overwhelmed by just how disappointed and angry I was about the whole situation. I just think that what's happening in Eritrea it's important to remember that it doesn't compare to many other places in the world. And the fact that we are not getting even close to getting what we need, and the fact that we're getting so little support from other institutions and countries and people, the fact that so many people within our own community is being blinded by their love for Isaias Afwerki and living in the diaspora, not, actually experiencing any of the issues happening in the country. That for me is overwhelming. So yeah, that's what I was feeling there.
All right, Vanessa. That was very powerful. I can tell you that. I'm sure so many people are very proud of you. I'm personally very proud of you. You really represented all of us, and then also you were telling like the injustice in Eritrea, and then your emotions were telling how the situations are in Eritrea. It's not easy, and I can really understand that. The weight on your shoulder because you literally representing everyone who is fighting for justice. And I'm sure that people in Eritrea will be very proud of you when they see this going through the satellite. And we always want you to keep up. I'm sure that you're going to be a good model for your Kaba and other young people and all of us as a nation and as a country as well. But in connection with this one, for the last 30 years, the regime in Eritrea is the top of the world list for the gross human rights violation against its people. However, to many fellow Eritrean surprise, I'm sure you and me, Eritrea was re-elected in late 2021 to the United Nations Human Rights Council. Why do you think that the UN allows for countries like Eritrea to sit in such important bodies while they are against every principle of such body? They were like, everything is against, the establishment. That one. Have you ever asked UN officials, like in engagements, like, I'm sure you talk with all different UN officials on the side of the meeting, stuff like that. Have you ever talked to them? What do they say? And then how do you feel about it? How do you feel to see Eritrea? That's the top, human rights violator sitting on Human Rights Council. So how do you feel about it?
I'm not at all, and I would never want the Eritrean government to be represented in any capacity because it's a murderous mafia group. So I don't think they have any position to be anywhere like that or anywhere in general. But I think it's important to remember that the Human Rights Council is a collection of states. Like, it's not that they were appointed to run, the Human Rights Commission, which would be a different entity, but the council are just the states moving around. So like Eritrea, we also have China being on there. We have Russia. We've had different. I think Russia actually was one of the few countries that were banned from the council, if I'm not mistaken. There have been countries that have been banned. It's not very common. So I think it's less of a political statement. I don't think it's to like, okay, they were chosen to represent in the human rights. I think it shows more of the flaws of the international human rights system and why are states still being represented in this way, given that kind of power? How do you create states, institutions that are better able to facilitate? But obviously, I don't think they deserve to be on any body, and let alone the human rights body. But I do think it'd be interesting to kind of break down what the Human Rights Council is, how states are chosen or elected, because it's not, I don't think, a matter of someone picking Eritrea and be like, oh, you would be a good fit, but it's very political. And so, yeah, I'd say that's my opinion. Again, I don't think they should be there. I don't think many other countries should be there. But if, what would determine what country can be there and what country cannot be there as well, because we do have democratic countries that are also perpetrating human rights crimes and they're on there as well. So I think it's an interesting conversation about these institutions and how they function.
Yeah, I mean that, the trust, the people, they put the trust on that institution, I think weakness when you see, governments like Eritrea. Because, like they can, defend, like what they do, they were like actually defending the human rights violation of the Russians against the Ukrainians, in that institution. So literally they were like against the institution itself. But in connection with that one, you are like on that UN summit, the Human Rights Council summit in Geneva. How was the atmosphere? When I see was everybody in that meeting was against the regime's representative or against the Eritrea. The reports were against, all the regime's activists. I would say like almost every country in the meeting were like, saying, about the gross human rights violations and everything. How was the atmosphere? How was it like the feeling? Especially, like I'm sure you were like face to face with the regime's delegation. I'm sure you were seeing their face and stuff like that. How was the environment? If you can like take us behind the scene.
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, a lot of countries were supportive of the Eritrean government, and I think if you look at it was a very long meeting. Like how they do it is that if there's a country of concerns, if there's a special rapporteur or someone who's been appointed to report on an issue in a country or on a thematic issue. So there's like a special rapporteur on women, for something like that, for example, or on the climate. Then we have, or on human rights defenders, then they have a meeting in the council where they discuss what that person has been investigating or the issue that's happening. And they can have emergency meetings. So for example, when the war broke out in Ukraine, they had an emergency human rights council meeting where they can make decisions. So they can vote. Should we elect a new person to do this? So there's like, it's a mechanism that can be used in different ways. So in this case, it was to discuss, because we have a mandate, we have someone who's been like chosen because all the states, or because of the states voting, there's a special rapporteur, an expert, you'd say, on Eritrea that does research, that presents their findings, that calls on the Eritrean government in those meetings, and outside they present at the General Assembly in New York as well. And so this meeting was to discuss the Eritrean human rights record from the past. They have, I think, 2 of these a year, usually. And so what happens is that there's a panel. So the High Commissioner for Human Rights will speak, the Special Rapporteur on Eritrea, and then they invited me as their guest. And that's why the 3 of us spoke at the panel. And then the state concerned gets to speak as well. So in this case, it was the Eritrean government that got to speak. And then after that, any states that wanted to could sign up to also give a statement. And these statements were split between states being against and speaking against their crimes, and you could hear very clearly. And then governments who were very supportive of the Eritrean government. These states were states, the classic, you can imagine which states these were, usually states with very similar structures, so other dictatorships and stuff like that. So it was kind of split. But for a long time, and as you know, there was a lot of even states who previously had been against the government were becoming a bit more warm to see how the relationship with Ethiopia would look like and how that could benefit them. So I remember when I was there the first time, I was very disappointed by a lot of the statements, even by the states that were actually against the government, because they were very opening and they were very much like, oh, we could see progress maybe happening, and we're very excited about what could happen in Eritrea, even though that's false hope. There's no such thing as progress in Eritrea under the regime that we have, and everyone knows that. But this time it was definitely back to a bit more critical of the government. And I remember many people came up afterwards, like saying, we hope we weren't disheartened by the comments, after your speech, because maybe you thought. And I was like, no, I knew what the speech could do, and I don't think it could change geopolitics or certain, like, states come there prepared with what they're going to say. It's not like in the moment, and it shows kind of what we're up against as well, to see that there are many states that support the government. Some states are against it, but also many states that they would prioritize their interest any day than to prioritize the interests of the Eritrean people. So it was kind of sad. And seeing the government that's supposed to be on our side, obviously being the perpetrator, sitting there in front of me was very angering as well.
Okay. So going back to your campaign and the nonprofit you started earlier, you mentioned new plans about a new campaign to help refugees in Sudan. So what can you tell us about this campaign and the objectives of it?
Like many other Eritrean activists and organizations, to document what's happening in Sudan at the moment. And I think Eritrean refugees are suffering immensely wherever they are. One of the things I said in my speech was that once the government imprisoned my uncle and his colleagues, they made sure, they were like, okay, we can do whatever we want now with the people. Like, we have full power over the country because we have no people left who will speak against us. Anyone who does will get imprisoned. Any institution that could stop us have been shut down. So that they were able to create whatever reality they wanted. And they decided to create a reality where being born in Eritrea meant being destined to a life of suffering. And so I say that to say that they succeeded very well. And they have created a world where if you're born in Eritrea, you will suffer for the rest of your life. And so many people are suffering in the country, as we've discussed, but many, many are also suffering outside of the country. And I think it's a responsibility of any human rights organization to never just focus on what's happening in the country, but also at every step of the way after they leave, which is why we focus on issues happening in the country, refugee issues, and also support when they arrive in their final destinations and they're struggling to integrate, struggling to deal with their trauma and all of those things. So for me and for One Day CM, that's a priority of being there at all steps of these suffering sequences that the government has created in conjunction with other governments, of course. Like, the fact that they're suffering when they flee is a result of migration policies from the West, for example, which is important to highlight as well. And so one of the groups suffering are Eritrean refugees in Sudan. And there have been Eritrean refugees in Sudan for a very long time. And they've faced many different challenges from very many different groups and governments. And now with the new government after the coup in Sudan, there's a certain level of lawlessness in the country. And there have been a lot of kidnappings, essentially, of Eritrean refugees. They, like Gifas, where they pick them up on the street and they take them to prisons. They treat them, in degrading ways in the prisons. And they also, more importantly, ask for money for them to be released. And so if they can't pay the money, they get stuck in the prisons. And if they can pay the money, they get released, but they don't get any kind of receipt to show that they have already paid. So many people get imprisoned again. And the amount of money they're asking for is increasing. And I just heard today that it has increased to $1,000 for one person. And this is happening in a country where, it's not, in a good position. Sudan is struggling a lot, but it's also not receiving any pressure around what's happening. So we want to at least try to raise awareness about this, to pressure the Sudanese government through their embassy here in London. It's sometimes easier to communicate with the states, like through their embassies, especially if we're based here. And to raise the voices of the refugees there. They're feeling forgotten and neglected, which is very rightfully so, considering the fact that it's been happening for a long time and they're not getting the amount of attention that they deserve. And so the campaign is aiming to, of course, end this, but also to provide support and solidarity to the people who are suffering there. And in addition to that, many refugees have not been able to get their ID, so they can't work. And so they're struggling financially immensely. And the people who are doing informal work are too scared to go. I mean, even if you have informal work, if you're too scared to go out to do work because you get picked up and get kidnapped. And if you do that, you can't. If you don't have family abroad, you have no chance at paying off that the money they're asking for. So that's what the campaign is around. We're going to launch it on One Day CM this week. So follow us on social media. There's going to be a petition. There's going to be many activities happening that you can get involved with. And so, yeah, just to say that, we hope to have different ways people can help. So there's always, if you're a member, you can help with the campaigns, either of these like campaigns that we've mentioned, or refugee services, or raising awareness. All of these things are open to members. And the idea is that if you're an Eritrean and you don't know what you want to do, but you want to help, join us, because either we'll figure it out together because we're always thinking about it, or there are going to be ways that you can already get involved, that you know, and it's all completely up to you. It's not a minimum. You would never pay a fee, or there's no requirement of time or money or anything like that. It's just when you have time, you can come and you can support. Once you say you're going to do something, you have to do it because we'll count on you. But apart from that, there's no pressure. And we have monthly members meetings the last Sunday of every month, where you can meet other members and get to know people and also brainstorm, come up with ideas. So, yeah. Oh, wait, you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, and hopefully, you know, this new initiative will be successful, and then we would be happy to assist in any way that we can, you know, promoting your campaign or anything that, you know, we should do on ERISAT. We would be very happy because we got work together to make some, you know, tangible, effective work. So in the last 2 years, you know, Eritrea has been involved in the Tigray war against the will of the people. Thousands of Eritreans, youth, elders have lost their lives for no reason. However, many Eritreans in diaspora supported the regime. Recently, you have posted a video on your Facebook page questioning how can you be an Eritrean and not angry, you know, overall, you know, the situation. So let's play that video, and then you can tell us, you know, about, you know, in general, what, you know, why do you say that and stuff like that. Obviously, you are describing it clearly, but I just want you to expand a little bit. Okay, so let's play the video.
And not be angry. And I'm asking it because there are so many Eritreans who are not angry. And I don't understand. There are so many diaspora-born Eritreans, so many Eritreans who came to the diaspora at a younger age. And how come there is so little anger, so little resistance from outside? Like, we all know people in the country are unable to resist the government. People get disappeared, they get killed if they try to do so. And honestly, I don't put any expectation on people who have fled the government to then lead the resistance from outside. These people have gone through hell and back, not just in Eritrea, but on their route to come to safety. And when they're here, they're dealing with their mental health, they're dealing with trying to integrate into the new society. I'm talking to the people who are born outside of the country, people like myself, who have been outside of Eritrea our whole life. And so I wonder why. Like, I genuinely don't understand why. Because the situation in our country is bad. It is so bad. And sometimes I wonder if people actually understand how bad the situation in Eritrea is. Like, I wonder if people actually think that this is normal for like an African country or like a newly independent country to be at the stage where Eritrea is today. And it is not. Like, it is not at all. There are structural problems that all newly independent countries, 30 years plus, whatever, countries face. Of course there are. There are structural ways that the West tries to keep Africa, Asia, Latin America down. There are. But the Eritrean government has gone above and beyond to make sure that those structural reasons will not be the only reason that Eritrea will be kept down. They have gone above and beyond to ensure that there are more restrictions, more oppression from themselves to make sure that Eritrea will be completely destroyed. You can ask any political scientist, you can look at any kind of like ranking or whatever. Eritrea is one of the worst countries when it comes to so many different things. Like, the Eritrea that exists today is a place where either people have already left or people are just thinking about leaving. There's no one who's just chilling there being like, oh, I would like to stay here if I could. No one wants to stay in Eritrea. That is how bad the situation is. And how can you know all of this and not be angry? Like, how can you think about everything that went into getting our independence, everyone who fought, everyone who died, just so we could get our country back, only for a few individuals to completely destroy it? My last theory is that Eritreans born in the diaspora don't view Eritreans who are born in Eritrea as the same people. They don't. They call them freshies. They don't really spend time with them. They don't really value them in the same way that they would value a random Eritrean who lives in a different country in the West. But an Eritrean who's come from Eritrea is just not someone they have any kind of connection to and therefore don't care about as much. So if you're not angry, ask yourself, why not? Why does the pain and suffering of the Eritrean people not anger me? Ask yourself that.
I mean, that is really, really powerful. And then I always wonder, I always ask that question. Not only, kids born on diaspora, but a lot of people who came from Eritrea, who has been imprisoned by the regime. Some of them, their family members are imprisoned. I don't understand why. And then this is the question that all of us were asking. But this is really, really powerful for me. And again, as I say, in the last 2 years, Eritrea was involved also in the war in Ethiopia. And so many lives has been lost. And then still people were supporting the war, just because they were like really, hate covered. So I just want you to expand on this one. I'm sure this by itself is like very powerful. You might, need to add anything, but, I just wanted to see not only those who were born in diaspora, but also those people who came from Eritrea, those who are like going through hell, coming through the Sahara Desert, like through, sea, getting to Europe. And then there are still people supporting the region. So, I just wanted to, talk about those two groups.
Of course. I think I'm when I made this video, I hadn't been active for like a longer period of time. So this is my first video, like big thing that I'd posted for a long time. So I wanted to make sure that it wasn't comprehensive. Like I'm not talking about all Eritreans. For me, at that moment, I was very angry about the fact that there are many Eritreans who are born like outside of the country, like myself, who are not angry, who don't seem to care. And I just couldn't understand how that could be. I think the situation for different groups are different within the Eritrean community. We have the old generation, which I'd say is more, they, especially those, I mean, this is the older generation, like my parents' generation, who left the country during the independence war and who haven't lived in Eritrea for a very, very long time. And many are infatuated with the government, with the president specifically. So that's another group of people. For them, I wonder, do you not want better? Like, is this all you're going to expect from this person that you love? Because if he was their child, would they have settled for this low of what he's accomplished for a country? That's what I wonder for that generation. If their child came home and said, "Oh, mom, sorry, I haven't, done my homework," or like, "I'm not going to graduate from university because, I have this enemy who keeps doing this thing to me, keeps doing all these, like, keeps stealing my homework, whatever. To what extent will you allow those excuses to justify how poorly that child is doing in life? Whatever the reason or whatever like the situation could be. And I think same thing would go to the country. Like, yes, you love this president. Yes, you think that his excuse, the situation with TPLF has been difficult for the country. But to what extent are you going to allow that to kind of destroy the country? Because if you say, yes, that's a very bad situation, which I would say what TPLF, after the war ended and how they've treated the Eritrean government, there are a lot of legitimate kind of complaints, I'd say, from the government side, and the way that they utilize the international space to isolate Eritrea completely based off their political agenda and not based on their human rights record, which people usually say. Eritreans' isolation from the international space had nothing to do with what they do at home. It had everything to do with TPLF not liking them. And I think there are very legitimate conversations to be held around that. But to what extent can you use that as an excuse for what they've done? And I think anyone who looks at it logically will say, okay, it's bad what the TPLF did, but it doesn't justify this level of oppression. Like, I mean, beyond my hand, like the oppression is up there, what they've done using this excuse. And I think that generation of Eritreans need to look at themselves and say, why can't we see that? And why are we willing to allow this government do this to people who are not us? Like, what does that say about me? Like, what does that say about us? For someone sitting in America and Sweden and Germany thinking, yeah, that's okay, they can do this to Eritrea. How much are you willing to let other people suffer for your own political interests? And I think the fact that you're willing to let people live in a country like Eritrea just to push a specific agenda or to push a specific hatred says a lot about you. And I want to add as well that we need to speak about privilege in the Eritrean community, because if we're sitting in the diaspora, that means that whoever's connected to us is doing much better than anyone who doesn't have anyone in the diaspora. So anyone sitting in Sweden, Germany, America, Canada, wherever, can't speak about the situation in Eritrea to the same level as the people in the country who have no one outside. Because the situation in Eritrea is terrible, yes, but it's worse for people who have no one on the outside. And I think there's an inherent privilege of people sitting outside of the country to be like, oh, it's bad, but it's not that bad. Yeah, because you're sending how much money back to the country for them to be able to afford the most basic necessities. You can say that they're surviving, yes, but what about people who have no one? And the same thing applies to refugees living outside of the country. They have many people who are stuck in Sudan, in other places, have no one. And that's why they're stuck there. And that's why their suffering is worse than the people who have family abroad. So for that generation, that's what I can tell them. Don't you expect more for your country, and how much are you willing to let them suffer for your own political agenda? For people like myself, I kind of said it in the message, we are privileged, we're extremely privileged because we were born outside of the country, and that chance, that like the lottery that we won, changed our lives, and we would have been in a different position. Many of us wouldn't even be, because we would have been fighting government, we would have been in prison. And I think we need to be humble about this kind of luck, and we can't just think that we deserve this. It's because we're just lucky. It just happened to be that our parents either left the country early or had been outside of the country, for whatever reason they were outside of Eritrea. We were born here, and we're living a very, very privileged life compared to our counterparts who were born in Eritrea. And I'm not saying that to say that we had an easy life. Many people in the diaspora have faced many issues, like within their own families, within the structures of like Western countries, racism, sexism, all of these things have affected us, xenophobia, all of these things. And I think that's not to say that hasn't affected us, but anyone who has capacity, anyone who has that kind of, hasn't been crushed by the systems already, they should be using their voices, and they should remember how much their voices can mean for other people who are suffering just because they weren't born in the right space because of the Eritrean government. And that's why it makes me upset. It shouldn't be that because I was lucky to be born outside of the country, my life was amazing, and because someone was born in the country, their life was destined to be one of suffering. That's because of the Eritrean government. And I think any other country can say something similar. Like, obviously, you're more privileged if you're born outside of the country from many other countries that are doing really poorly. But the extent to which that privilege is completely life-changing is different. Like, a diaspora Eritrean and a person born in Eritrea, our lives are on opposite end of the spectrum. Whereas in other countries, a diaspora person is more privileged, but that doesn't mean someone else born in that country couldn't succeed and they couldn't have a decent life. Whereas in our case, you can't have a decent life if you're born in Eritrea. And I think we have to remember that. As a whole, there are a few people in the country, of course, that are, having a decent life if they have enough privilege within the political system or whatever. But as a whole, you can't have a decent life in the country. And as long as we know that as Eritrean diaspora born people, we need to do what we can to help. Like, we have to, because it's on us. It's on us. And if we don't do it, then again, like my uncle always used to say, if we don't do it, who else will? And in our situation, it's genuinely, if we don't do it, I don't know who else will. Considering as well the fact that we're so many Eritreans living outside of the country who were born here. We're so many who have interesting career skill sets that could actually benefit the people, again, both in the countries and who fled. And how can we be sitting on all of this and not doing what we can? So I have that, the privileged people. And then the final people are the people who have fled. And I have very complicated kind of opinions around this. I guess there's quite a lot to say. So I don't know if you have another question or if you want me to go into people who have fled the government and might still support them, because that's something I could speak about as well.
Yeah. Go ahead. Speak about it. Yes.
So I'm very against any kind of discussions around sending people back to Eritrea. As an activist, I campaign against the human rights abuses in the country, which means that I don't want anyone to experience that. It has nothing to do with who you are, if I like you, if I dislike you. Human rights has nothing to do with likability. It's about you being a human being. So I would never ask someone or send someone back to Eritrea. I think it's despicable. And I think people doing that should really question why they do this and question how well they can actually separate their own likeness of someone else, how much they like someone, to how they treat them. Because at the core of human rights is about the fact that you don't deserve it. You don't have to deserve it. It's just about the fact that you're human. That's it. And I think that being said, that's just my personal value. But in addition to that, I think we need to also unpack why people support the government who have fled the government. We've said so many times, we talk about all this. I mean, this whole platform is providing an alternative perspective to Eritrea, Integringa, which is reaching people across the country, people who can afford it, but people who can't afford it, or people before ERISAT and other platforms were able to broadcast. We have said so many times that the Eritrean government is a propaganda machine. All they've done is talk about why the country is the way that it is. And there was a time, and there's still a time, where they deny abuses completely, but no one in the country can deny what's happening. I mean, they're living through it. But what the Eritrean government has done consistently for the past 20 plus years is blame all of their issues on external sources. They've blamed all of their issues on whether that's TPLF, on sanctions, on the international community, on neocolonialism, on all of these different groups of people or institutions. That's what they've done. It's been a propaganda machine for more than 20 years. And that doesn't say that they're saying that none of these things are happening. I mean, these people, as you said, have been in prison themselves. They've been national service. They've experienced it themselves. It's not about knowledge necessarily. It's about the root of the problem. So I can go through something terrible here I live in London, for example. I can cross the street and a driver can run me over. Of course, I know I was run over. I was there. It happened to me. But if they said, for example, the driver was poisoned by someone else, then I'm not going to be angry with the driver. I'm going to be angry with the person who poisoned that driver. And I think we need to remember that many of Eritreans who have fled have been brainwashed by what the Eritrean government said. They believe that the root of the issue in Eritrea is not the government, it's what they've been forced to do because of these other sources, because of TPLF, because of the international community, because of sanctions. Because of that, they were forced to create the country that exists today. It is not their fault. It is because of these external sources. I don't believe it at all, but that's someone who's lived outside of the country, who's had the privilege of going outside of a propaganda machine. And yes, maybe that's not all Eritreans. There are maybe Eritrean government, supporters who don't believe that. But I do believe there's a large group of people who have been brainwashed, who hold these thoughts. And I think it should never be in our power to punish someone who doesn't understand where the root of their oppression comes from, especially when they've been brainwashed. And we know this, and that's what we always talk about. Like, how can we speak about the propaganda machine and forget about the consequences of propaganda? It means that someone has been brainwashed. That's what propaganda is. And to unpack that and to get someone to change their mind, especially after people reach a certain age or whatever, is very difficult. I mean, you know this, having conversations with someone who's convinced about something to get them to change their mind could be very difficult. So I think the group of people who do have these opinions, I'm not saying it's all of them, but I do think that this is a large reasoning behind it. So I don't even spend energy being angry with people like that, because for me, I think I completely understand. And I'm not in any moral position to deny someone human rights because of how much I like them, how much I agree with them. That's completely against what human rights actually is as a concept. And so that's why, for me, I'm very passionate about that in a different way than I am passionate about the other Eritreans who are silent or supportive.
Okay, I think that's fair. Yeah, go ahead, Yarkaba.
Okay. I just wanted to agree with you on topic of the factions within the Eritrean diaspora community. Mm-hmm. The youth, particularly, there seems to be a lot of uneducation and ignorance, and especially now with the power we wield with social media and how we could utilize it, there's not much being done. And so going on to social media, in the last couple of years, the PFDJ have spent millions of dollars on social media trolls. And these trolls, they work endlessly to destroy and character assassinate people like you. So how do you deal with these PFDJ trolls, and does it affect you, your work, your activism, and your family members?
Thanks. So I think PFDJ trolls and anyone who's associated are exhausting. Just to make that clear, I mean, anyone who does activism experience it to different degrees. Anyone who speaks on Twitter will get messages or assaults or whatever, and it's exhausting. It's upsetting because it makes you wonder how many of those people there are. And I think it makes you tired because you think, oh my God, there's so much resistance. Are we really the majority? I mean, we know that the PFDJ, the government, has always been the majority when it comes to the public space because of the fact that they are the government, because they had so many supporters. And you sometimes wonder, are we making any progress? Are we reaching people? But as I said, since 2018, it's been much more support as well. Online, people are with the Akan movement and people getting more open, and many people who believed, as I said, because there are many people who are now in opposition outside of the country who were around independent media, all of those things. And they believed that what was happening in Eritrea was because of TPLF. And then when TPLF was removed from power and nothing changed in Eritrea, they're like, oh, maybe the government was lying. And they started becoming more publicly against the government. And people who were just, okay, let's at least wait, until the situation is resolved, until we speak out. And these are people outside of the country. So, I mean, just to say that this propaganda machine has been very effective. It's the best, most censored country in the world. Of course, they're being effective as well. But yes, I think there's been much more anti-government publicly, but seeing how much harassment there is these days, coming back from a bit of a break and seeing how much harassment, I feel like almost more now than it was a year ago, and how many they are. Of course, you never know how many are bots, because there's been a lot of speculations, and I know there's research now into it more. It's tiring. That's what I would say. It's also hurtful sometimes. They say things that are not that nice, on a human level, and you learn to disregard some of those things. But I personally only care when people say stuff about my work that I'm already worried about. Like, as a human being and as an activist, my main like worry is that I'm not doing enough. And so sometimes when people would say stuff like that, like pointing to the efficiency of my work or how much my work is actually making a difference, that would sometimes I'll be like, oh, but is my work not making a difference? And that would like touch an insecurity of mine that I had. But now I'm much more secure. I know what I've done. I know what I've been doing. I know what I can do. I know what I can't do. And so that doesn't really affect me. But it's anything that might be, touching on an insecurity. And I think obviously people do that intentionally. But they say stuff about how I look or stuff like that. And that doesn't really affect me because their opinion holds no value within me. But when there are things that does affect you, of course. And for people who like see it as well, on social media, it's also disheartening, and it's very it's a deterrence, because if you see that happening to someone, you're like, I don't want to be online harassed, so I'm not going to do that as well. So I think it's both tiring and deterring for like other people.
Yeah, I mean, PFDJ trolls are not easy. Not only PFDJ, but it's just we know that social media can be sometimes very cruel. For you to be that vocal is just being courageous. So I think that's not easy. Of course, over time that you can get used to it. But so many people that I know, they can do so much. They can contribute to the cause. They don't come out because they were scared of the trolls. They were scared of what can come for them, for their family. So I can tell you that it's a lot of sacrifice that we have to do, and then it always affects you. Sometimes it can really get into you because they come after you, after your family, after so many things. As you mentioned earlier, they do like the mafia stuff. So they know that how to kind of hurt people, annoy people. So, but for you, being like at the forefront for the last 10 years, it's just very courageous. Having said that, as we have been discussing, you were you have been starting activism, and then you're doing it since you are like 16 years old, while you are like in school. So, what can you advise the younger generation to get involved with, and how they can balance, activism and school?
Mm-hmm. Of course, I would urge people to join One Day Seum, because it's a space created for people who want to get involved outside of Eritrea, regardless if you are diaspora born or if you fled the country, or even the generation, our parents' generation. Anyone is welcome to join. A majority of our members are like the youth generation, which is very broad. It just means, I guess, generational. It's like our generation, mine, your Kabed. It's like people who, born around independence or after independence, I'd say. That's definitely like the prime, I would say the largest components of our group, but it's open to everyone. And the reason I recommend for people to join is because it's a space that's been created deliberately for people who want to help. So all we do is think about what can we do, and try to do it, try different things. We push for the things that work, and we pull back when we think something's not useful. But all we do is try. So if you want to be a part of a group like that, then you should join One Day Seum. I also urge people to start their own thing if they want to, but to remember that consistency is the most important thing. And if running your own group or your own initiative is quite tiresome, so I would definitely urge you to either start it with someone else or join an existing group outside. Either it's One Day Seum or another group that's run in a way that you like. I really always try to, someone once said, one of my members was like, you're so good at customer feedback, because I would always I email the members regularly to talk about meetings, events, or anything that we're working on, tasks. So we send out lists of who can help with this and that, and people sign up and stuff like that. And then I always send questions. How do you think things are going? How do you like the members meetings? Do you prefer we do this, that? So I try to make it as inclusive as possible, how we do things. It's not just run by me and a few other people, but it's truly a group project with anyone who's involved. And so if you're in a space that's dominated by a few individuals, or that conversation's not happening, then maybe think about if that's the space that you want to be a part of. Because before you join something, make sure that's actually somewhere that aligns with who you are and your values and your interests for Eritrea. So definitely join One Day Seum. I think remember what you can do and what you can't do. That's remembering that has been the reason I've been able to keep doing this work, and probably the reason I will continue to do this work forever, is knowing my limits. one of the times I had difficulties with my work was I was working for Amnesty International as their Horn of Africa campaigner for a year and a half, which meant that I covered Ethiopia and Eritrea. And working on the Ethiopian conflict was difficult because it was very difficult to know what we could and what we could not do. With a new war happening, with a completely different state, with all these institutions that have been set up specifically to combat violations in war, I was more confused about what can I do and what can't I do. And that was very stressful, extremely stressful. That was probably the most stressful aspect of my activism, time. I understand the government. I know what they do. I understand governments that are oppressing Eritrean refugees in different ways. We've studied them. We know what's possible, what's not possible. And so remembering that in our work and remembering that when we balance things as well, because it's not going to help anyone for you to drop out of college and like not get your degree to push your activism, because that means, that's not going to change anything short term. This is a long-term game. And so as long as you commit and you're consistent, that doesn't mean you have to do it constantly. It just means you have to do it consistently. And we need as many people as possible. Like, people need to remember as well that when I call and when other people call on people to get involved, at least for me, I can only speak for myself, we're not calling for you to completely dedicate your entire life to this. Although I don't think that's a weird thing to ask for, considering how bad the situation is. I would like more people to dedicate as much time as they can. We have one of the worst crises like our country's faced. Like, the mere existence of our country is at risk at this moment. So like, we need, and I don't mean that from an existential, from outside, I mean that internally, like our country as we know it, our people as we know it, the kind of core of our identity as an Eritrean, like our young generation is suffering and who knows if they will heal. So this is like the kind of like the problems that we're dealing with. Yes, as many people as possible need to be dedicating as much time as they can. But if you can't do that, then there are many ways that you can help and support. And that's why we, as like One Day Seum, as a member, you can, if you want, just support our campaigns online, like, retweet, sign the petition, and that's good enough as well. But of course, we want you to do more, and we want you to do as much as you can. But any contribution is valuable, and we need to be many. Like, we can't do this anymore with like 50 people running, like being a part of a campaign with the amount of people we have in the diaspora. So anyone needs to get involved if they can. And that's definitely something that I hope people understand, is that you don't have to dedicate your entire life to it, although that would be nice. But your mere support and contribution, just in whatever capacity you have, will be valuable to the movement.
Okay, I think I'm gonna put Yerkabel on the spot right now. So Yerkabel, what do you learn from today? From Vanessa. She started when she was 16. She's been doing it for the last 10 years. Have you learned anything today? And then just give you an opportunity, just whatever you want to say, short.
Well, you definitely are like a big inspiration. I actually didn't know about you until Saba introduced me, but I think, yeah, and I think there's a lot of like misconnect within the youth and the diaspora, and I guess involvement. And after like learning about your story, how you started at the age, I guess similar age to what I am now, 16, and you single, I guess with the support, but it was you who took the initiative to, in a society where there wasn't much support or outcry for the crisis going on, you were still able to be courageous enough to go out and take initiative, and that's something I truly admire, and I think it's inspiration for a lot of other people, a lot of other youth, once they they hear about people like you who are representing us at the UN Council now, and things like that. So
thank you so much.
Good. So go ahead, Yerkabel. You have I think you have another question. Probably that's maybe that's what is exciting for you, right? When you see that one, when you do the research.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I heard you met with the Pope. Yeah. You seemed quite young, actually. I was looking at the pictures, and you seemed quite young. But how did you feel when meeting him? It's a chance that a lot of people don't get, but they dream about it. So take us behind the scenes of the meeting.
So I was at the Vatican to speak about refugees in Sinai and in Libya. So it was like an initiative on human trafficking that the Pope had spearheaded, and that there was like a conference around it. And we didn't know that he was actually going to come. We knew it was his kind of like initiative, but we had no idea he was going to come. But he had decided to come, and we weren't prepared for his arrival, or like us, the people, like the participants, didn't know. We hadn't had time to think about what we could do if he came. And so there was, obviously, had the opportunity to speak to him, which was a big honor. But the first thing I thought, because at the time we were running a campaign called Siem is My Brother, and that was a way to raise awareness about Siem's case. So we asked people to take a picture that said Siem is my brother, that they held up in a picture, and posted online. And that was a way of raising awareness and sharing Siem's story. All of our T-shirts, all of our material had Siem is my brother, because the idea was that if you say Siem is my brother, you form that connection to him. I'm going to fight for him like he's my brother. And he is, my brother who's imprisoned, essentially, was the idea. And so when I saw the Pope, the first thing I thought was, I need to get him on the campaign. So I got a piece of paper and I asked someone to find me a pen, and we were like writing like, I am the Pope and Siem is my brother, as a part of the campaign. So as soon as I got the chance to speak to him, we didn't have much time. I just asked, I actually asked, do you speak English? Because I wasn't sure. And then he said yes. And then I asked, do you want to take a picture for this campaign? Can you give me like 2 minutes to explain what it is? And then he's like, of course. And I explained, it's my uncle, he's in prison, but it's also about my country. It's a dictatorship, and he's one of many people who are imprisoned, and we want to raise awareness about what's happening, etc. He just said, of course, I want to help. I want to support. So we took the picture, and that was it. I actually met him again a few years after as well, but I didn't get to speak to him as much then. So this is like my most memorable meeting with him, and the picture that came out. Like, unfortunately, there's another picture when he actually takes the picture, and you can see the text if you zoom in, because the pen wasn't that great. But it meant a lot. It was a year after I started One Day Siem. I think I just turned 18, and it meant a lot because it felt like there was support, and I remember there was some information at the time. I mean, now of course he's very powerful, but he was quite vocal at the time, so he was very powerful. He was considered one of the most powerful people in the world after, I think, Obama and Putin or something. So knowing that there was someone of that like level of importance who was supporting the campaign that I'd started and that had been done for our people in a time where we felt so neglected, meant a lot at the time, and still looking back, it still means a lot.
Yeah, that's really very important, and it's another inspiration from you, Vanessa. I'm sure a lot of young kids, they really get inspired by stuff like this, because as your Kabel said, this is a dream that a lot of people want to have, not only young, but everybody. So almost we are done, kind of finishing up our session for today. So you know that this is going to go via satellite to Eritrea. So yeah, I want you to convey your message. Probably you can do it like in English and Tigrinya. Whatever you want to say, just say it directly to the people inside Eritrea.
I also, before I say my message, I forgot to speak out the war as well. And I will send you guys my full speech, because it's like 5 minutes, and I touch on a lot of different things. And I do talk about the war, and I call it, from the Eritrean side, an illegal war effort. I think it's really important to go over when a country can go to war and when a country cannot go to war. There are actually international rules and regulations and laws around these things. It's not like the president can just decide. And even if there is a threat to Eritrea, if there's a threat from outside, external threat, internal threat, a government can't just do whatever they want to respond to that threat. And I think that's important to remember. Even if you don't like the TPLF, if you think that they were posing a threat to the Eritrean country, what can the Eritrean government do legally, both internationally and domestically? Like, we don't have a constitution. So technically, they didn't break any laws, because there are no laws to be broken internally. But if there were, the government have had to discuss it in parliament. They had to pass it legally. There are many steps that they would have had to take if they were to respond to this threat legally, both internationally and domestically. And I think that should be at the core of the conversations of what we talk about when we talk about the war. It's not the fact that we think that TPLF should do whatever they want to our country, or that Eritrea, we should just leave it to be destroyed by external enemies. But we know that, this decision was made by one person or a few people around him as well, and has put, unnecessarily killed, traumatized, damaged, injured many, many, many Eritreans. And it's destroyed certain aspects of like Tigrayan societies and caused a lot of pain and suffering to the people in Tigray, both Tigrayans and others, including Eritrean refugees. So we have to look at it from like as a country. This is not just a like it's not just a group of people doing whatever they want. This is a government, and a government can't just risk the lives of their own people for pursue their own personal agenda. It has to be for the country, and the only way you can determine if this is actually worth it for the country is by going through these processes that they haven't gone through. So for me, what they did is unforgivable, and the effects this has had on the Eritrean people, especially the young people who had to fight, and the other people who were recruited later when they kept recruiting more people, is devastating, because it's not just, you know, the fact that I was mentioning my life is so different as an Eritrean born in the diaspora, because I have all these opportunities, and not just opportunities. Let's take away the opportunities. Don't have to deal with the suffering that the Eritrean people go through. And on top of that, I have all of these opportunities. And now in the past few years, in addition to the national service, in addition to the suffering that they experience in the country, in addition to the refugee issues that they face when they're fleeing, they've also been forced to fight in a war. And the idea that if I had been born in Eritrea, I could have been fighting in a war, that's not the country that Eritrea was supposed to be. Eritrea was supposed to be a country where people who are young could study, thrive, and live their safe and dignified lives, and instead they're being forced to do all these different things, including fighting. So I think that's really important. And I know many people were upset when they heard that statement who were Tigrayans, because they felt that I was minimizing their pain or excusing the behavior of the Eritrean soldiers. And I think we need to learn to have more contextual conversations around this and not see things in black and white. Eritrean soldiers committed war crimes, and I worked at Amnesty International when those reports were coming out and was a part of the process of creating those reports. We used the exact same methodology for the reports we did on Tigrayan crimes from the TPLF, EPLF, from the YPF, from the PFDJ. We use the same methodology, and so I don't like for a second believe that no parties committed crimes. I think all parties committed crimes, but I think it's important to contextualize why certain things happened, and to even say they committed crimes. That doesn't take away from the fact that they were forced to be there. That doesn't take away from the fact that many of these soldiers who didn't commit crimes are also going to suffer afterwards, who are just there. So like, I think we just need to have more nuanced conversations around this to fully understand the problems that we are facing. It's not a black and white issue. And as long as we continue to see it as a black and white issue, we will never address the root of the problem. And for our countries will never heal. Because if we just look at the soldiers as evil perpetrators who just did all these things and they're terrible people, then we will never get to the root of the problem of why they're there, how they're going to heal. If many of them hopefully will face justice, then what's the best way of making them face justice? I think these conversations are going to be crucial to the development of our countries. And if we don't look at them in a contextualized and nuanced way, we're going to fail, and something else is going to happen in the future that's going to be either the same level of devastation or even worse. So just wanted to say that.
All right. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. And then, as you say that, we would be happy to. We already sent us the small clip, and then we are going to send also the full speech that he made at the Human Rights Council. But again, at the end, I just want to give you the opportunity to say a few words to the people inside Eritrea. Maybe also if you want to say something to the people in diaspora, but I'm sure you already say so many things about the diaspora. So, just talk to the people inside Eritrea, directly.
Yeah, I'll do it in Tigrinya because I'm worried if I do it in English, it'll be hard to translate.
Yes, go ahead, please.
My levels. So, okay, Kajiman, I hope English kulu tadikum and is Arab ko. Nasi Tigrinya ጾቦ አይኮነን ኣብ ወጻት ተወሊደ ዓብያ ግን ኩሉ ይርዳእኒዩ ሓደ ግዜ ክዛረብ ከለኹ እቲ ቃላት ከምዚ ይዝክሮ ግን ርስኦ ምሻለሁ ክፍትን ያ ጾቦ ገረ ክዛረብ ክርዳእኩም ኣነ ኣብ ወጻት ስለ ዝተወለድኩ ይስማዕኒ ናተይ ከምዚ ሬስፖንሲቢሊቲ ናተይ ስራሕ እዩ ክሰርሕ ናይ ሃገረይ ኣነ ኤርትራዊት እያ ከም ዝኾነ ኤርትራዊ ኣብ ዝተወለደ ወጻት ዝተወለደ ወላ ኣብ ዝኾነ ዝተወለደ I think ኩላትና ኤርትራውያን ኢና ግን ኤርትራውያን ከዓ different capacity responsibility ኣለዎም ኣነ ኣብ ወጻት ኮፍ ኢለ ይኽእል እየ ክዛረብ ክቃለስ እዚ ኩሉ ይኽእል እየ ወልሓንቲ ኣነ ወልሓንቲ ኣይኸውን እየ ኣብ ኤርትራ ኮፍ ዝበልኩም ግን ይፈልጥ እየ ገለ ትኢልኩም ገለ ትዛሪብኩም ክትጠፍኦም ኢኹም ወላ ክኣስርኩም ኢኹም ዝኾነ ጥራይ ክበል አንድ ዘለኹ በይንኹም ኣይኮንኩን I know ኣብ ኮፍ ኢልኩም ብዙሕ ክትገብር ኣይኽእልን ኢኹም ግን ብዙሓት ሰብ ኣለዉ ኣብ ደገ ምሳኹም ዘለዉ ዝፍትኑ ዘለዉ and I know يسمعكم اب edit TV ريهم ولا بزخ يسمعكم سب رستيكم ولا أقدشكم يوم تيجات ماله كن أيكم أيخونن I hope كن بزخ بزو سب كزارب كجمر more سب كزارب يجمر كن unfortunately كم أيخون زلات يكونتات هجي كن تي عندس كم نخنا كن كتسلين ناتي صراحة كابت متعرش دا أنت رأي عنك بالزلخو أنا أي مثلا إنه كونتاتنا إريترا كمزي بتعمي كمزي حما كونتات أب إريترا زقاطم زلها سبات كفلت أب بزوها أرتات كمزي ولا حنتي comparison يبلون so I think that I could felt وها إريترا كونتات normal يكونن ولا حدا واجن normal يكونن and ناتنا كمزي ناتنا responsibility of دقة كوفيلنا كن كتل كنك علس إريترا عدنا كتملسلنا شوها كمتي زقب أزنا برات كت مع بلد كتكون طبقهم so I'm very sorry تقولي كفتني improve كقبل and I hope it's a message across the net
بدعمي صبوغ ينيرو صبوغ تقريني أخي تزاريبكي بفلاي كاني أبدأ توليدو نزعابي Slazy, thank you for your time. Yerkabel, if you want to say something and more data, we'll give you the chance, and then Madam Nahal Asina.
Oh no, I didn't have much to say. It was just a pleasure to have you. I definitely learned a lot from today, and it's gonna be like a moment I look back to because this is my first, I guess, like my first like actual like discussion with a person who's been so involved, and so thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for coming today. And we are very happy for coming. I'm sure so many people are looking for you. And then we always wish you success. And we are also looking to work with you to help, on everything that you do. دقيمنا خبرات تهاتلتي سلمسانا زمسهم شميم شم كلهم أبالات إرسات كمسكنوكم يدلي كالي جيزي مس فانيسا يركابلين فانيسا تقرينيا كجبرة مهانن أنا أتو زي برومشيت thank you Vanessa
thank you
يركابل okay bye